Andrew, if you're out there, can you turn on your video and microphone and we'll test your presentation? There you are.
I am here.
Great. I'm gonna stop my share and see if you can start yours.
That should be it.
There we go. Great. Wonderful. Okay, we've got about 2 minutes before we start. So if you need to grab a beverage or something or a notepad, go ahead and do that. And we will get going in about 2 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to mute myself and stop my video. And Andrew, whatever you want to do, if you just want to hang out there, that's fine too.
I'm good with hanging out, or if you can just let me know when to start.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty excited. Cindy, is this being put on the YouTube channel?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Well, I wasn't 100% sure on that.
Things looking good. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on such a beautiful June evening. I'm Cindy Harn from the Nature Foundation of Will County, and I'll be your host for tonight's presentation with Andrew Hedman, owner of Good Steward Ecoscapes. Andrew's here to talk with us about the importance of conservation in our own backyards and how to best incorporate both native plants and naturally filtered water features to support wildlife. But first, the Nature Foundation is a nonprofit charity that raises money in support of the Forest Preserve District of Will County's programs and initiatives that protect nature, inspire discovery, and bring people and nature together. We are recording the presentation tonight, and we will post the video to our Learn and Grow page of our website and the Foundation's YouTube channel. And everyone that registered will receive an email with a link for viewing by Friday. We'll have time for questions and answers after the presentation. So type your questions into the chat and we'll be able to get to those later on. These seminars and everything we do is powered by gifts from our donors, supporters, and corporate partners. If you've made a donation, thank you so much. Generous hearts keep these seminars free of charge and our mission alive. And if you'd like to support our work, there's a link in your registration confirmation, or just visit our website at willcountynature.org. So a bit about our speaker, Andrew. Andrew is owner of Good Steward Ecoscapes, a veteran-owned and operated local business here in Will County that specializes in ecologically friendly landscaping, focused on 3 critical components to support our local ecosystems through backyard conservation, those being providing food with native plants, habitat, and a source of naturally filtered drinking water. Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker tonight, Andrew Hedman. All yours, Andrew.
Thanks, Cindy. I really appreciate that, and I really love your guys' mission. I mean, my backyard is Will County, so I love it. So to move forward with the presentation, this picture here is of my pond before it was technically finished built. But yeah, as Cindy said, the 3 main components of my business are a food source with native plants, and then naturally filtered water, and then habitat, primarily with native plants like shrubs, but also with cut branch piles if it's allowed in the different town or city you're in. But also an example would be a pond, because you have frogs that come to your area. And in my pond, actually, the great majority of ponds experience mallards will visit. So no further ado. My thing didn't work. That's weird. I'm gonna escape Cindy because it's not working. There it is. Never mind. Okay. All right, so why the need for backyard conservation? So for those of you who saw my presentation at the plant summit, you're familiar with this slide. This is from the Nature Conservancy, and this is Illinois. On the left, we have the early 1800s. You got this kind of tan color, which is more prairie, savannas, and then you have your blue for rivers and wetlands, and then your dark green for more forested areas. And you can see the significant difference between northern Illinois and then southern Illinois. What you'll see here in this area, this is, I believe, the Naperville Bolingbrook area of DuPage. And so this is before Chicago was even really founded as a settlement. And then over here on the right-hand side, this is present day land cover of Illinois. You can see significant difference. A lot of the prairie is now gone. It is now agricultural land, cornfield, soybeans, some cattle. A lot of the forests are now gone, and a lot more suburban sprawl and city sprawl, especially up here by Chicago. And you got your little pockets throughout. So one of the sad things is only 0.1% of our original prairie remains in Illinois. I believe the latest statistic is 2,500 acres of the original 22 million acres remains. So that's very concerning, especially for those of us who are Illinoisans and we're concerned with land conservation to provide habitat. And then of the original wetlands, 90% have been destroyed. A lot of those have been drained to create farmlands. One of my former coworkers, she lives up in Wayne, and she says a lot of that area towards Wayne and then around the cities was former wetlands that have now been drained. And I do believe either Will County or DuPage County recently did a restoration of an old farmland to prairie or grassland, and they had to go in with an excavator and actually dig out a lot of the drainage tile so that it would be go back to its proper natural state. So what happens is that drainage tile will take the water and the moisture out of the ground and it directs it to, say, a drainage ditch. So now you have your wet soils that don't provide for those plants anymore. And then thirdly, our forests in Illinois, they declined from 13.8 million acres down to 3, and now back up to 5 million acres. And one of the important things for us to understand about our forests is that 90% of Illinois forests are privately owned. So not only do we have to conserve them in the public space, but also private landowners need to understand the proper ways to manage those. Because if I as a landowner own, let's say, 100 acres of forest, but I don't manage it, then it's not going to provide for the habitat and natural resources as good as it can if it's being managed properly. Down south and in the west, there are foresters and professional land managers who do those sort of things, and there are a few of those throughout Illinois as well. Most of them specialize in prairie, especially up in our area. So that's something to consider if anyone has large amounts of area, that it does have to be managed properly. And for me, I'm a Christian. I think of Genesis 1:28 is considered the first commandment. A lot of people will think of go forth and multiply, i.e. have babies and families. But there's a second part of that which says have dominion over the earth. And it's not dominion in the form of a dominance or you're just in control. It's more of a dominion as in I'm in charge. I have to take responsibility and actually take care of my home. Another way to think of it is in medieval times or the Dark Ages, a king would leave a certain area in response, like a steward would be in charge of a certain area. and that steward was in charge of taking care of that area for the king. So it's similar concept from Christian viewpoint is that, I have a half acre. I'm responsible for taking care of that half acre in the way it's designed naturally. And in our area, Joliet Plainfield, a lot of our area is historically grasslands. I mean, I live like right here somewhere. So, oh wait, no, I don't. I live somewhere down here. So that's my personal living. So why the need for backyard conservation? This is where we tie in the native plants with the living water because not everyone can use water, but everyone does have land. So Douglas Tallamy, he's an entomologist. He wrote Nature's Best Hope that 83% of the land in the United States is privately owned, so we have to take care of it properly. And that of that privately owned space, that 40 million acres of lawn is lawn, and then 500 square miles is added every single year. And the issue with traditional lawns is that they're technically an ecological dead space because most of it is foreign plants that isn't from our area, and most of it doesn't have flowers to support pollinators, and most of it is not a food source for insects. So if you think of the typical Illinoisan lawn, if it's, let's say someone just average care of it, they're probably going to have, a couple species of grasses, maybe some clover, maybe some dandelions, and that's pretty much it. My grass, I don't really take care of as a normal lawn. I mow it a couple times a month, and that's it. I don't water it, I don't fertilize it, I don't herbicide it, and from what I can tell, it's definitely improved over the past few years. This picture in the background, this is a prairie corner or what some people call them pocket prairies, that I installed by my mailbox in May of 22. I believe this picture was taken in June or July of 22, and I have some after photos after this. So Douglas Tallamy, he refers back to E.O. Wilson, who's another entomologist. He died, I believe, last year. And he wrote a book called Half Earth, where he said that 50% of our natural spaces need to be preserved in order to preserve 80% of our world's biodiversity. And the basic concept of biodiversity is that the greater you have of biodiversity, the healthier you have of an ecosystem. So that's what Doug Tallamy goes back to, is he says if we preserve half of our 40 million acres, that would then be 20 million acres, and that would be the United States' largest national park if you total all of those acres combined. So the main issue here is if we don't support the bottom of our food chain, the top of the food chain will starve. There will be some some few exceptions, but for the most part, the higher up you go the food chain, there's not going to have food from the bottom. So native insects, native birds, native mammals, they all thrive in areas with native plants. And especially with birds, 96% of terrestrial birds, i.e., songbirds, birds that aren't like seagulls, piping plovers, birds that aren't located around aquatic areas, they raise their young on insects. And the main insect that they raise their young on is caterpillars. And if you think about it, caterpillars have soft, squishy bodies, and those caterpillars are then high in nutrients. So what we ideally want to do with our gardens is plant keystone species or different specific plants that will support specific species of butterflies and moths, and they'll support the most butterflies and moths, which will then support bird populations, which also supports things like foxes and bats and a lot of the smaller mammals. So main keystone species in our area is the oaks, your quercus, and then your cherries and plums, which is your prunus, and then your willows, which is your salix. And then if you want to get into flowers, then you have what some people consider cornerstone plants. And what these do is they support specialist pollinators. So what that means is, let's take a bee, for example. There are certain types of bees that will only use certain genuses of flowers to pollinate. They will gather the nectar from. So here we have your aster flowers, your goldenrods, and your sunflowers. Now, the cool thing about goldenrods and sunflowers is they also can be considered keystone plants in that they do support um, multiples of caterpillars as well. So when I'm designing landscaping, I always want to include goldenrod, sunflowers, and asters if I can. And then if not present already, I also want to include an oak, cherry plum, or willow, just because that's the best basic foundation of supporting local ecosystem. And then these are photos from my yard last year. In the top left, we have um, landsleaf coreopsis and butterfly weed. Butterfly weed is the orange flower. And butterfly weed, if you didn't know, is a type of milkweed. And milkweeds are the only plant that monarchs will lay their eggs on. So on the right, you have a monarch. I don't know if that was born in our yard or not, but it was definitely taken during migration season in the fall, and it's eating the nectar from a liatris, northern blazing star, which is also in that prairie corner. In the middle is just kind of a front view. There's prairie dropseed, which is grass. It's a decorative grass. It's pretty common. And then towards the back, you see some hairy mountain mint, which is the white flowers. And then there's some, I believe that's showy goldenrod, the yellow. And then the bottom left, we have a bumblebee on a hairy mountain mint. Bumblebees are nice and cute, and I can't think of anyone who's afraid of bumblebees. So they're really easy to support. You just have to use the right plants, and the right plants are native plants. All right. So another thing is, as homeowners, what do we all have in common? Well, we all have gutters, and gutters means downspouts, and downspouts are an opportunity to plant a rain garden. The picture in the background is from the University of Illinois. It's an example. It's also photoshopped, if you can't tell. Those flowers don't necessarily bloom at the same time, but it's an example of how you can take an area that floods and use plants. And the reason why this is important is according to the EPA, 10 trillion, that's with a T, gallons of untreated water enters the United States waterways every year. And I've done some rough math and I've brought this down to the local level. Will County, we have approximately 250,000 homes. And during a 1-inch storm event, those homes receive 265 million gallons of water. So that means great majority of that water is entering our local waterways, which means the DuPage River, I believe the Des Plaines River goes through Will County, and those eventually feed the Illinois River, which then eventually feeds the Mississippi, and the Mississippi eventually feeds the Gulf. And so it's important that this water is filtered. And the easy way to do that is have a rain garden off your gutter, or divert the water in such a way that it goes through native plants, and those native plants will then filter out the water. Um, uh, Hard minerals, any sort of potential pollutants. I don't want to say fertilizers, but there are some organic runoff, so like decaying leaves, things like that. The high ammonia from the decomposition process entering the waterways isn't a good thing. It can kill lots of fish at the end of the system, i.e. in the Gulf of Mexico. There are issues with algae blooms, which then are bacteria blooms that then die off, and then the die off process takes oxygen out of the water, and then that kills fish, which is a problem. And it's a problem that we can prevent by using rain gardens. So what is a rain garden? It's simply a low-lying area along a ditch or road that collects water or is temporarily flooded. I think in my home, at the end of the driveway, where the driveway meets the road, in a heavy storm event, it does puddle for about a day and then it goes away. There is a culvert pipe under there, so that kind of diverts it. I'm not a huge fan of those because that water, one, it doesn't get infiltrated into the groundwater, and two, it doesn't get filtered by native plants. If you think in more rural areas throughout the Midwest that they don't have those culvert pipes underground, it's just a ditch. If we put native plants in those ditches instead of grass, it would filter the rainwater and the stormwater runoff significantly better than just grass that gets cut once a week. And as I said before, with the dying fish, stormwater runoff is a huge source of pollutants into our rivers, lakes, and our oceans. And anyone in Illinois should be concerned about this because all of our water ends up draining into the Gulf of Mexico, which is ultimately the Atlantic Ocean. And I think rain gardens are one of the most practical approaches to conservation, especially global conservation, since we're connected to the ocean. And as an added bonus, they do add the food source for local wildlife. Plans for a rain garden. This is a picture from the National Wildlife Federation. I don't even know what plants these are, but it just shows you that instead of having grass by your sidewalk, you can put plants that offer good solutions. So if we were to use native plants, they would offer food source for wildlife, and they would also help with that stormwater drain. And I would say the most common mistake I see homeowners make is they think that because it's a rain garden, that they don't have to water the plants. But if you think about it, it doesn't rain all the time. We do have droughts, and in the summertime, things do dry up. So if I take a portion of my yard and I dedicate it to plants that love water, well, if it doesn't rain for say 3 weeks in the middle of summer, those plants are going to struggle a little bit unless they're incredibly established. So what I like to recommend customers is use plants that tolerate both wet conditions and dry conditions. And if you choose plants that really like water, let's say they belong in marshes or like ponds, then you may have to water them once or twice a week when it's dry. Here's a list of plants that work well in rain gardens. There's also a list on Department of Natural Resources website. I think Conservation Foundation has a list. But these are plants that I have growing in my own yard, and they're all easy to care for, and they all will tolerate a wide variety of sunlight, shade, and water saturation as well. So you got cardinal flowers, sedges, asters, goldenrods, ironweeds. Ironweed is another keystone plant. It supports a lot of species of butterflies and moths. And then you have swamp milkweed, onions, prairie dropseed, golden Alexander, and then coneflowers. I really like swamp milkweed because it seems to be monarch butterflies one of their favorites as far as milkweeds go, and they do tolerate somewhat drier conditions. So I think they're a really good choice. And again, if anyone decides to do a rain garden in their own yard, just be prepared to water it maybe once or twice a week when it's drier. And then as those plants, their roots get more established, you can either decrease that to just once a week regardless, or maybe once or twice a month. It depends on the species. It depends on the yard. There's so many variables. It's not a one size fits all approach. So now we're getting into the water feature specific side of what I do. This is something called rainwater harvesting, and the concept is if you have like a veggie garden, or you have a really hard time with water that just pools up, let's say in a portion of your yard, what you can do is you can take water from a downspout and put it into the basin for a water feature. So in this picture, it's a basin for a waterfall, and the water will come from the downspout over here, and it'll get filtered in this downspout filter. It goes into the basin, and this basin can hold usually 100 gallons all the way up to a couple thousand gallons, depending on how you design it. And then the basin will usually overflow into, I've never seen this built. This is kind of an old technique. But usually what they'll do is they'll overflow, down the hill, and you can plant water loving plants in that overflow area. That's what I've done with my pond. I have my pond. It's not connected to my downspout yet. It will be. And then the overflow kind of goes off to my lilac hedge, and eventually I want to get some Kankakee mallows, because Kankakee mallows, they can tolerate more drier conditions than the other ones. And I want to get some like sedges and something to look cool. So this is really important because backyard conservation really starts with the soil. So anyone who's into organic gardening understands that soil is really the foundation of having good, healthy crops. And The reason why this is good is because you have no unnecessary herbicides, no unnecessary pesticides, no unnecessary fertilizers. I call it HPF just for simplicity. Um, and with certain water features, especially ponds, you will get a bacteria mulm, and that bacteria mulm is really good to water with your plants because it acts like a natural fertilizer. Um, and this is really popular with ponds because you got all the fish waste, but it can even exist in waterfalls because the birds are taking their baths in there, they're pooping, then you get then you get organic waste with the wind and so forth. So you're going to have natural source of fertilizer from this water feature. So soil, like I was saying, it has microorganisms. There's insects living in the soil. I mean, we all are experiencing the cicada emergence of 2024. Those cicadas were living in the ground for what, 17 years for a lot of cases. There's small mammals, there's rodents. I have mice, I have voles in my yard. I don't want to poison them. There's amphibians. I have a client, or had a client in Oswego. She had toads, even though the nearest creek was a couple hundred yards away. I have toads in my backyard. Toads are pretty much everywhere. And all of those microorganisms and microfauna, they contribute to our local ecosystems. So the regular use of these HPFs, they dramatically disrupt this micro ecosystem, and that can disrupt the larger ecosystem as a whole. The the biggest comparison I can think of is fireflies. We've seen a dramatic decrease in firefly populations over the past few years. I've talked to older people who've lived here for decades, and they say it's nothing like when they were kids. Part of that is because of suburban sprawl. Um, our old farmlands are being purchased up and being converted to housing tracts, and they're being converted to, say, commercial mall spaces. But part of it also is because these lawns that are being taken care of in methods that aren't beneficial for the local ecosystems. And why is that? So city water is treated with harmful chemicals. So you have chlorine and chloramines, and these are going to harm those microbes in the soil. And I've seen it way too many times where people will plant a veggie garden and then they saturate those gardens with their tap water, and their tap water is heavily chlorinated. And in some cases, tap water has lots of heavy metals in it too. If you use a rainwater harvesting system, and it doesn't have to be an expensive system, you could just have rain barrels. There are no heavy metals in that because it's rainwater. Rainwater is just, it's not pure H2O, but it's the closest thing to pure H2O that's easy to access. So case in point, collecting rainwater, it's a practical approach to saving clean, healthy water for use in gardens. Many people I know who I'm friends with or coworkers who have veggie gardens, they say that utilizing this rainwater from either their pond or waterfall or just rain barrels, they end up getting bigger, healthier crops. And my friends and coworkers who use rainwater and then also have native plants, let's say on the border of their veggie gardens, they say their crops are just gorgeous and they're better than buying organic from the store because it's straight from their garden. So this is the concept of rainwater harvesting for a water feature. So instead of having a rain barrel here that's above ground and may or may not be ugly, it goes through this filter process into the basin, and then it gets pumped up into the waterfall, and it's circulating. You treat it with beneficial bacteria, so it's naturally filtered. There's no chlorines. So there's really no need to worry about those harmful chemicals. And then again, heavy rainfall events, this will fill up, and then it'll overflow. You can put it towards a hedge, or you can put it towards the street, whatever makes the most sense. All right, so now we're getting to the living water aspect that supports wildlife. The very bare bones basic setup we have is bird fountains. I personally do not service or install bird fountains unless, very special circumstances, but they're a very budget-friendly way to give birds a source of clean, healthy drinking water to bathe in, but also drink. If you're looking for a bird fountain, I do highly recommend Wild Birds Unlimited in Joliet. They're extremely knowledgeable on birds, and I guarantee you they care more about birds than the teenager who's on a summer job working at that big box store. He's just trying to collect a paycheck. Wild Birds Unlimited, that's what they do. It's their hobby and they love it. So if you're looking for a bird fountain, go to them. They have heated bird baths. They have little solarized fountains. It's great. Highly recommend them. And as a note here on the bottom, I have just this little comment that all life is dependent on water. If we didn't have water, we wouldn't exist. And then as stewards, we should provide local wildlife with a source of clean drinking water. And again, it doesn't have to be a super elaborate pond or waterfall. It can be something as simple as a bird fountain. All right, so bubbling boulders, this is the bare bones of something that's decorative. This is at Aquascape. This was at the employee, right outside the employee cafeteria on a patio. They have this bubbling boulder with permeable pavers. So this would just run off of rainwater. So it's got all this moss on it, and you can see it's got these frogs living in it. I believe this is 2 different species of frogs. So this was a picture I took when I first started working at Aquascape, and I just loved it. And you can see it directly supports wildlife, and birds would take baths in this all the time. This is a little bit the next up. These are formal fountainscapes. These are Aquascape products here. These are three sphere display, and you can see it makes an awesome front entrance. And this particular customer had decorated it for Halloween. And they even have a spillway bowl. These spillway bowls, you can put aquatic plants, any sort of veggies or whatever that like water, you can put in there, or you can put impatiens. You can put native aquatics. A lot of people like to put annuals like impatiens in these. But all of these features are naturally filtered water sources, so birds will take baths, and they're just great. More examples of fountainscapes. These are just urns that Aquascape manufactures. On the right, you can see that they can function when in freezing weather. Some people will choose to run them 24/7, 365. The great majority of people will choose to turn them off for the winter time and winterize it. That basically just means pulling the pump and then covering it so it doesn't get a lot of water into it. You don't want the pipes to burst. But some people will run these features all year round. And in the middle there is a little finch just taking a drink from the urn. Just great. This was at my friend's house. That was an urn that he installed himself. He just got a do-it-yourself kit. But good memory. And then this is the next step up, is waterfalls. This was a picture I took when I was working at Aquascape. They had a pond tour similar to Nature Foundation. They're going to have a garden tour. Aquascape would have pond tours, and this was a little, I want to say it was like an 8-foot stream and waterfall combination. When I was talking to the homeowner, there was a little wren that jumped up into this, I think it's a fir over here, jumped down, grabbed a drink, and flew away. It's just gorgeous, and it looks natural. It's not, but it looks natural. It's not like those prefabricated projects you see. So it's a really gorgeous way to revamp your yard and also support wildlife. And to hear these things running, it's super relaxing. There's some studies that show that running water gives off ions, and those ions increase, I think it's our dopamine in our brain. So that's why running water is always relaxing. Next is waterfalls. So you can see a smaller waterfall off the side of the deck. This is what this is one of the kits that Aquascape installed for marketing purposes. It's just a really neat way to revamp your yard. If you're like me and you don't like mowing, you notice there's absolutely no grass that needs to be mowed in this area. That means no gasoline emissions for this area. You got this beautiful running waterfall that if you choose to, you can run it in the wintertime. And the birds are going to love this. This would be something, if you were sitting in this chair for an hour, you would watch birds constantly just diving in, taking baths, and going out. And I wouldn't be surprised if there is a frog. This is what they can look like in the winter time. I believe the picture on the right is an old picture from Aquascapes, Aqua Gardens. They totally redid that space so that water feature doesn't exist anymore. Um, but these things are super awesome when it's starting to snow. What some people do if they decide to winterize it is they will run them until, say, New Year's. So they'll still get these sorts of displays with the snow. And then once New Year's hits or after Christmas, they'll shut it down, winterize it, and then they don't have to worry about the severe weather in January and February. Because usually our weather is pretty mild until January, and you can still get the snow and the cool ice formations. I run mine all year round. I also know what to look for with features that are running all year round with ice, so I'm not worried about it. And I also don't do anything in the winter time, so I can care for it if something goes wrong. So it's definitely something to consider if you're wanting to do a waterfall or a pond. Is do I want to run it in the winter time? Yes, no, maybe. Um, if you do, you definitely need to be prepared to um, just maintain it or pay someone like myself to go out and make sure it's running properly. And if something goes wrong, that can be costly because it can cause a crack in the plumbing if the water stops flowing in that pipe. And you may or may not need to replace the pump if the pump ends up running dry and then burning. So it's something to consider. The last but not least is ponds and water gardens. This again is an install from Aquascape. And technically they're not koi ponds, they're water gardens. And that's because Aquascape's approach is an ecosystem pond, which uses plants as part of the filtration process, and it uses this naturalized look stone. That's what I've done with my pond. And that's where we have the picture from the front. This was the very first year I had it up and running. It wasn't even finished yet. Bullfrog made its home in our pond. It's sitting there on the rock there to the left. That bullfrog is still there today in 2024. This picture was taken in 2022. And now he's got probably a dozen, if not a couple dozen bullfrog friends and one or two other species that I'm not able to identify. I used to want to be a herpetologist when I was younger, so the fact that I have frogs living in my backyard and something that I built is a huge reward for me. I just think it's incredible. And then these are these are the native plants that I have in my pond. I've got swamp milkweed, cardinal flower, horsetail rush, a lizard tail, blue flag iris, marsh marigold, pickerel rush, swamp rose mallow, swamp asters, American sweet flag, and then buttonbush. Buttonbush is a really great plant for butterflies. They love it as a pollen / nectar source. Nectar source is the appropriate term. Mine hasn't bloomed yet, but it should bloom next year. And it's just a butterfly magnet when it is in bloom. And then these are pictures I took of my pond. On the left here, you see a great blue heron. He visited. He ended up getting a couple babies. And you can tell this was before my pond was really even up and running. It looks completely different nowadays, but this is just a fond memory of the heron visiting our pond, and it's a good the old adage, if you build it, they will come. That is definitely true with water features. In the middle, we have a 12-spot dragonfly. Dragonflies are a predator of mosquitoes, and I can confidently say that the difference now compared to before we started breaking ground in our yard with mosquitoes, we have much fewer mosquitoes now because we have a pond. So it's not what most people would think about. Most people would think pond equals mosquitoes. That's only the case if it's a stagnant body of water. Ponds are being circulated at least once an hour, if not twice an hour. And if it's built properly, it's going to attract dragonflies, and the dragonflies are going to lay larvae in there. They're going to eat mosquitoes. And on the right, we also have hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are another natural predator of mosquitoes. A lot of people don't know that. They do eat insects. So that's another reason why we have fewer mosquitoes now than we used to. We also don't spray for mosquitoes. that's just asking for trouble. I was watching a presentation from Douglas Tallamy, and he knew somebody on the East Coast whose HOA sprayed for mosquitoes, and right after they sprayed, he found a bunch of dead monarch butterflies. So when we spray for pests, that kills a lot more than what the spray is targeting. So I don't spray at all. The minor exception is inside our house. I will put ant killer around our windows because we have carpenter ants. I'm not spraying outside, so I'm not really that concerned about it. These are other resources. First is Nature Foundation of Will County. So a huge shout out, Cindy. Probably get brownie points for that. And then the second source is Conservation Foundation. They're one of my strategic partners. Sagmarine Native Plant Community. They are a nonprofit based out of Palos Hills, I think. So their big mission is just educating people about the importance of native plants in the landscape. So I highly recommend you visit their website. You can read up on native plants. And what they've done is they've filtered out a lot of the native plants that are hard to have in home landscapes, and they recommend plants that are really popular and they're really easy to care for in the home landscapes. If I remember right, they target for plants that are less than 3 feet tall. But you can go on there, they have a filter and you can select plants based on the site. Next resources is local forest preserve websites. So DuPage and Will counties both have amazing resources. And I believe Will County has an active Instagram. I think it's Will County. The naturalist ladies are always posting videos that are fun to watch. And then there's Illinois Wildflowers.info. I will use Illinois Wildflowers.info when I'm trying to figure out species specific relations for plants. And then last but not least is Douglas Tallamy and Rick Dark. On the right is Nature's Best Hope. That's the book I used to make that one slide with all the facts and statistics. And then the book on the bottom, The Living Landscape, was written by both Rick Dark and Douglas Tallamy. This is really good for anyone who's a do-it-yourselfer and wants to get into the kind of the design aspect of gardening. I highly recommend it. It's got great photos and it really breaks down the simplicity of designing a landscape. It talks about your horizontal layers and it talks about your vertical layers and it also talks about your horizontal layers, and it just breaks down simply. So that's pretty much it. So are there any questions?
Hi there. Yeah, a couple questions. Can you talk more about what winterizing looks like if you have a more complicated water recovery and fountain system?
So yeah. So let's just go with like a fountain. I'll go back a few slides if I can. Didn't work. All right. Nope. Goodness. Okay. So let's go off of this one. I have to share my screen again. Okay, so now back to this slide. So let's just say we have a simple fountainscape. So what you do is you turn it off, then you disconnect the pump. You store the pump like in your garage, and then what you want to do is you put a tarp over this urn so it doesn't get excess water in the basin. You don't want to drain the basin because groundwater can actually push the basin out of the ground. And I've seen photos with waterfalls as well that have a couple 100-gallon systems that were drained. Is the groundwater pushed it out of the ground? It had to be completely rebuilt. So you don't want to drain it. Let me see that again. Yeah, so like in this case, these photos were probably taken in like November or something like that. when you winterize it, you don't have to worry about tarping it. All you have to do is disconnect the pump and either pull it out of the basin. But if you have a deeper basin, you can actually leave it in the basin. I've seen people do this with ponds. Um, they'll leave it, what they'll do is they'll disconnect the pump and then they'll put the pump at the bottom of the pond because the bottom of the pond isn't really going to get frozen. And if it does, it's not going to really damage the pump. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. If, so another question, if someone doesn't have a water feature and wants to add something like a pond, or more of a, waterfall system, how would they get started? What would be the best, place to start doing some research, especially if they're a do-it-yourself kind of person?
So if someone is a do-it-yourself kind of person, I would simplify it, and I would just recommend go to Aquascapes YouTube channels. They have a lot of how-to videos, like do-it-yourself videos. And I'll recommend Aquascape for that because they have kits, and they're also located in St. Charles, which is like an hour north of me. Um, you can buy their kits on Amazon. There are other manufacturers that have kits. I'm not sure if they have how-to videos, but the concept is pretty similar. Um, so yeah, it's pretty much.
So tell us about the services that you provide. If someone wants to work with you, what kind of things can you help them with?
So my goal with my business is to pretty much be a full service landscaper that doesn't cut grass. Um, and I don't really want to install patios or repair patios. Can I do it? Yes, but it's not my forte. Um, so when it comes to basically the two main components of my business are water features and then native plants. Um, so on the water feature side, I do design, build, install, maintain, and same thing with the native plant side, design, build, install, maintain. Um, with water features, I have maintenance packages. So if someone doesn't want to maintain it, I can come out once a month. I can come out twice a month, once a week, or spring and fall. I have a seasonal package. Same thing with native plants. If someone, I just call it native gardening. So if you can think of gardening, I offer that service. I'll come out once a month, twice a month, once a week. We can customize it. Like if it's a seasonal cleanup, I can do something like that. Or if it's more of a, hey, Andrew, I need you for 2 or 3 visits, but I don't need you for the entire season, I can be flexible with that as well. I don't technically do habitat management, which is a large scale care of, let's say if you have like 5+ acres or even 1+ acres. Can I do it? Yes, but once you're getting into those larger acres, technically the best way to do it is you should do prescribed burns. I'm not licensed or certified to do prescribed burns. So if I were to take care of a larger space, it would be more of a invasive plant removal or, hey, Andrew, I just bought this 5-acre parcel and I want to naturalize it. I can renaturalize it. I can remove invasive plants. So things like that. I can install, um, on the native plants side, I can install little prairie corners or pocket prairies. I believe the smallest I'll go is, I can't remember if it's 50 square feet or 100 square feet, but I do go pretty small. Um, so yeah, I think that answers your question.
Yeah. When it comes to adding water features, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making in their yards and their water features?
That's that's a rough question because it really depends on what they're doing. Um, I would say the biggest mistake is not doing their research ahead of time. Um, and that can be anywhere from, oh boy, I would say mostly it has to do with caring for the water feature. I think a lot of people don't realize what naturally filtered water does. So if you're going to have a naturally filtered system, you're going to have algae. And the best way to fight algae is one, you have to treat it with bacteria. But two, you have to have clean water in there. So people who aren't, draining it at least once a year and then refilling it, you're going to have issues. But sub thought to that is, let's say someone has like a pond. They have fish in their pond and they've added fish and the fish are happy and you're feeding them and they're happy. And then you get an algae bloom. A lot of people will go online and they'll buy a product called an algaecide. And without really researching how to use it, they will likely overdose or they won't use an oxygen like bubbler and they'll end up killing their fish because the algaecide will kill off all the algae and then all that's material, organic material is decomposing and that's taking all the oxygen out of the water and that's killing the fish. I personally don't recommend algaecide. It's available, but I don't like using it. In my own pond, part of my maintenance routine is about once a month I will go in and I will physically remove that algae. A lot of people don't have time for that, but there are other eco-friendly approaches for that. Yeah.
Great. So how did you get interested in this work?
Oh, that's a long story. So the water feature side is kind of funny because I'm from California, and when my wife and I got married, it made more sense for me to move out here to Illinois because she had a stable job. I didn't. I was in finance at the time. It was 100% commission, and I wasn't doing well enough to be for her to move out to California. So I got a part-time job at Aldi, um, brand new in California. And then I requested a transfer from Aldi in California to Aldi in Illinois, thinking it would be easy peasy because their headquarters are in Batavia. Turns out that Aldi in California is a different LLC for legal reasons, so I couldn't get a transfer. I had to technically quit. Um, and yeah, so I was looking for a job. One of the YouTubers I follow, he had a pond built by Aquascape. Aquascape sounded cool. I applied, got a job in their retail store, and then while working at the retail store, I learned about native plants and how those are beneficial for the ecosystem. And I started using native plants. I stopped sharing. I just realized we're looking at Steve. I'm sorry. So yeah, I got into work from basically retail. I've always had a passion for nature of some kind, and I've always liked fish. So ponds was it combined my two favorite hobbies, gardening and fish, in one. So water garden is amazing. Um, and then I believe two of my coworkers were into native plants, and they were explaining how there's a difference between native cultivars and actual true native plants. I was like, wow, I had no idea. Because a lot of the plants that we sell in the pond industry are actually native aquatic plants. I just didn't know that at the time. And the more I learned, the more I researched, I realized that when I wanted to start my own business, that for every water feature I built, I wanted to incorporate native plants with that water feature. And then when I did start my business, when I got connected with Sag Moraine, Kathy was telling me in my area, so Plainfield, Joliet, I'm the only contractor that specializes in native plants, as far as we know. So I've slowly kind of grown more into native plants than water features. I still do both. I still want to do both, but yeah, it's a cool ride.
Wonderful. Someone just has a thank you. Thank you, Cindy and Andrew. I've had water gardens in all the places I've lived for the last 30 years, ranging
Awesome.
from tubs to large ponds. It's my favorite type of garden.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, that's wonderful. And that wraps up our questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Andrew. We're glad you found your way here to Will County and can help us spread the word about native plants and backyard conservation. We really appreciate it. For those of you that are looking to sign up for more sessions, we've got a session with Benjamin Vogt in August. He's going to come and talk about using native plants that you might find in some typical garden centers. Some
That's
are
awesome.
starting to carry more native plants. He's going to talk about the pros and cons of that. And then in October, we have Lorraine Johnson joining us, and she has just completed a book, writing a book last year about pollinators and native plants for the Midwest area. So she'll be joining us in October, and registration is open for that now. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's a beautiful night. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Andrew, be well, and we will see you around again, especially at Wild Birds Unlimited.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for your support. Have a great evening and a wonderful summer.
All
Take
right.
care.